The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, religion, and theater. We'll explore how African Americans who have been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity have succeeded in the United States of America. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is stage and screen actor Danny Glover. Welcome to African American Legends.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown.
You have sort of set New York City on fire recently by your performance in Fugard's Master Harold and the Boys. It's just recently closed, but I want to ask you, some 20 years after you were in the performance, playing the role of Willie, how it feels to play the role of Sam, which is sort of an age difference, both in terms of you and the play itself.
Well, actually, it's certainly a role that I feel as if I've matured into to a certain degree. For me, coming back to Fugard, it's only in some way coming home. I began with Fugard. I'd like to say to people, and I've said it often, that had it not been Fugard and his writing, I perhaps would not have been an actor. There's something about the work itself, the way in which he tells the story, the way in which he writes, which are beautiful for actors to work with. I mean, he is certainly the 20th century version of some of the great, at least this half of the 20th century, some of the great playwrights in America and in the world. He is in some way O'Neill. In some way, he writes so passionately about what this human dynamic, and that in itself, coming back to him, is always refreshing, because certainly the values of acting, certainly the values of listening, of making choices, are so ever present in his work. And I get a chance now to refresh myself on the craft itself, and also refresh myself in another way, re-energize myself about acting, and to say what I've always thought what his play said. What is this dynamic about being a human being? What is the dynamic about change and struggle that is a part of the human experience? And that's what Fugard does.
He has done it, throughout his career, particularly dealing with the situation in South Africa, which was so obviously obscene, obviously wrong, obviously immoral, and yet he took the skill that he has to write to humanize the individuals who are involved in this drama. And now, when the play was written, apartheid was still there. We were trying to help people to understand it. Now apartheid is gone, and now we're looking at a new South Africa. Yet, when you look back, I see some of the same dilemmas that were described, for example, in Master Harold. The extent to which the white community still wants to control, even though the black community is in the majority.
Well, you don't eliminate the institutionalization of a process which has been in existence for the first time that the Dutch arrived, the first time that the African arrived. You don't do that in 10-year period or 15-year period.
We found that out after the Civil War.
Well, we find that out even now when we deal with the issue of racism in this country, that it has, in some ways, has repositioned itself in different various ways, and that the struggle is ongoing. The struggle for human dignity, the struggle against evil, in some sense, is an ongoing. I'm not talking about President Bush's evil. I'm talking about the evil that's in people's hearts to do wrong and to be unjust. Those things go ongoing. That's an ongoing struggle. So we have in South Africa, which is merely 10 years out of apartheid, still grappling with those issues. And perhaps they'll, generations after generation, will be grappling with those issues. But certainly, one of the things we would hope that in the new South Africa, that the real purpose and intention and real dedication to eliminating this form of racism and this institutionalized system will be the priority of this government and of the government in South Africa currently and successive governments. That's what we hope in the process, that institution is in some sense torn apart, and you begin to one, learn new habits as human beings have. You don't you don't do this overnight, but also the system itself or the government itself encourages those new habits as well and supports those new habits.
And of course, the United States of America has a major role in this, because for a long time they denied that apartheid was really the danger that it is. They wouldn't go along with the sanctions, and now they're gradually creeping along, not yet totally recognizing the economic power of South Africa. President Bush has just recently been there, and he's reaching out with $15 billion for AIDS, which he thinks will help to save the country. But that doesn't really deal with the core issue of recognizing the economic viability of this country.
Well, I think there's certainly we can spend the whole program talking about South Africa and what has transpired in the last 10 years. And some of us have been encouraged and sometimes been disappointed in what's happened in South Africa. Those of us who worked steadfastly to bring about a new awareness of the AIDS crisis, the pandemic, we're very disappointed in what the South Africa government has done thus far to play its part in the mediation of this disease. But when we talk about a world which is for the most part dictated economically by multinational corporations and interests which go beyond just the parameters of the national borders. We talk about a world in which we're dealing with those issues. Then certainly we have to look at South Africa from not just a new nation state, but also what South Africa represents to the continent itself. Now, South Africa, so as it is the most industrialized country on the continent. So within the hands of this government, they have the tools to be a very important factor on the continent itself, and particularly in that area, the SADC, the group of nine Southern African nations have come together as an economic workhorse to try to better the region and everything. Is a step in that direction. What do we play out? If the issues of globalization play out in all of our lives to some extent, and we're talking about the issue of the idea of globalization being a tool really to enhance human development, not in its present form. It is not that in its present form. It's that in its present form, it is a tool to enhance profits and to expand profits. That's what it is in its present form. So if we see globalization, if we see South Africa as perhaps a model, given its past struggle, given the past struggle as a model for this new vision of globalization that the world desperately needs, then there's a great possibility. If it becomes a model for continuation of the old vision, and now it becomes the global factor, the globalization factor, or the big king in the mountain on the continent of Africa, then perhaps we've missed the boat. You understand what I'm saying? So all these are kind of issues that it's too early in this process of development and this newly formed government to see what direction it's going. We have to encourage it to go to the former, not the latter, but the former.
It's very interesting. You are probably most prominent among actors. People in the film business have been very outspoken on this issue of South Africa, very outspoken against the war in Iraq, very outspoken on the whole question of global economics. The question I want to ask you is, How did you develop this awareness? I know you from the West Coast, from San Francisco State, and all those people around there. How did you really get this awareness? Did this come through your acting? Did it come through your living? Did it come through people you know?
Well, it comes in several ways, you know. I mean, as a young student, we tried to read everything from Mandela. I first read Mandela's writings when I was 21 years old as a student. We're reading Mandela, Julius Nyerere, reading Ahmed Césaire, reading Leopold Senghor, reading Kwame Nkrumah, or Kenneth Kaunda, or you go on and on and on in the list of writers, Frantz Fanon. This is the kind of reading that we were all engaged in, or reading C.L.R. James when we wanted to know about the Caribbean or whatever. And so you go on and on and on. These are writers that we passionately study. I mean, these weren't coursework. This wasn't coursework where you take the course and you read it and you debate it, but there was stuff that we talked about and had really discussions about. There was a level of discourse when I was a student that I was involved in and became involved in, which extended. It included what we saw happening in the Black Power movement. It included what we saw happening in the Black Student Union movement, but it also included what we saw happening in neighborhoods, the struggles within neighborhoods for self-determination, the struggle within the Black community, whether in my community at that time was redevelopment, you know, gentrification is formed, and trying to link and understand those struggles in relation to global struggles that were happening. And still, we were in the midst of defining what these national liberation struggles were going to be about. So when I was a student, majoring in economics, those are the kind of things that would concern me and interest me, and that at each step, whether we were not only young students who were trying to theorize what was our own thoughts at our very very embryonic ages, as a very sophomoric ideas, with our very sophomoric ideas. But we were young students who were trying to get out there and internalize what was happening in the community. I worked in the tutorial program when I was a student. I worked with WACO, which is the Western District Community Organization, when I was a student. We went to those meetings in 1967, 1968, when what was happening with the regentrification of the Black community was at a very critical point. We went to those meetings and participated and met and learned, and sometimes were too arrogant to learn what we did. But I mean, those were the times that when I met Cecil Williams and the Willie Browns and the Rip Ridleys and all those people who were out there at that time.
See, it's very interesting. I'm an East Coaster, and our university is on the East Coast. Much of the zeitgeist for the movement came from the West Coast, came from San Francisco State, came from Harry Edwards.
Yeah.
And is that because your struggle was a little bit more difficult out there because you were really somewhat fewer in numbers, whereas out here in the East we had large populations in New York and Baltimore and Boston and so on, and we were arguing among ourselves as how we were going to take over, and you folks were helping to analyze the basis of racism and what we need to do to change it. Well, Harry Edwards, for example, in the sports thing, helped to change the movement.
Definitely. I think there are a lot of factors from standpoint of young students. From the standpoint of young students, if you look at what happened, there are a number of factors that happened. There was a kind of cultural awareness that came about, which found itself essentially in the East Coast, in New York, and also
cultural nationalism,
and also on the West Coast. What was unique was that was in the free speech movement on Berkeley, which began around 1965, 1966, and brought another kind of element to that. Now, the free speech movement, you could say, in the kind of progressive area that San Francisco had represent. The ILWU was one of the most progressive unions in the country, you know, and radical, really progressive and radical.
British, right?
You know, you look at the history to desegregate certain elements of certain institutions within the Bay Area. Those things were happening And there seemed to be just kind of hotbed for one, for kind of cultural activities, you know, some of the great, certainly some of the music that came out of the 60s, you know, to feed that, some of the ideas, you know, the Haight-Ashbury, all those things fed into that.
And the beginning of blacks in film.
And beginning of black?
In film.
Exactly.
The whole movement, what do we call it, the blaxploitation movement.
All these things happen out here. Plus, what I think fed the movement of particularly black students out in San Francisco was the migration of former SNCC workers, young students who now come out because the potential of San Francisco begin to come out there, settle in that. I know for sure that what I think radicalized San Francisco State was the fact that a number of former SNCC workers had come back from wage battles, young people still, you know, certainly just a little bit older than myself. Young people would come back after waging battles in the South, you know, forming relationships, coalitions, you know, and working in the way in which they worked in the South, and come back and added another kind of level in the progression of politics in the area, and they brought that to it. Some of that was felt within the Black Panther Party. Some of that was felt within in community development, and a lot of that was felt on the campuses, particularly San Francisco State, which was a working class campus. It was a teachers college. It was a working class campus. It didn't have all the panache and everything else of Berkeley and everything else, but it had that right here. So a lot of that happened from that standpoint. And then certainly once we went on strike in 1968, really we went on strike in 1968 for three things. One, they had fired Nathan Hare. Two, they had we had demanded an ethnic studies department, you know, and that was pure coalition politics. African American students, Asian American students, Native American students, Latin American students, you know, all of them came together, plus progressive forces, progressive whites, and teachers like that came to that And the other part of it is that we went on strike in support of the students in Paris who got on strike as well. So there are three elements that went into that strike, you know.
Well, you and the...
And I was at that time, I was involved with the BSU. I was on the BSU Black Student Union Central Committee.
Now, how'd you get in the film business?
Well, how did I get in acting? First of all, I was getting in acting. Well. First of all, I got in acting, and I had never, there's no reference. I was telling someone this morning, there was no reference to me as an actor in my family. In fact, the idea would be the farthest idea from my imagination, you know, as an actor. But I was a student out there, and we had invited in the spring of 1967, we invited Mary Baraka, Leroy Jones out, who was a leading proponent of black culture at that time. We invited him out there, and we were able to do that because the Black Student Union basically controlled the Associated Students Union in all no simple terms, pure hardcore politics, you know. And we had organized it in the tradition of A. Philip Randolph to take it and the whole Randolph said, you know, it takes organization to hold it. And we had to come out there, and then I was saying, control that, and we said this is who we wanted out here. We brought Amir Barak out there. He started a community communication project, which involved a lot of people came to the table. Huey Newton came to the table with that. Eldridge and Marvin X were part of that. Ed Bullens were indirectly involved in that. All those guys who were now writing.
The East Coast version, interestingly enough, I started the African American Studies program at New York University in student protest, and we got the money. We had Baraka, we had all the folks, Ed Bullens, and so on. And the East Coast version took more of a cultural nationalism with the art, the visual arts, with acting, with dance, and so on. And we had some of the same dynamics. Probably in the East, it was a little easier to do some of this because we had such a large population mass. We would have a function at NYU, and we'd have 3,000 people outside to listen to Baraka or to hear Braithwaite or any of the various folks. So it's interesting to see that out in California, you use the same political strategy, get the money from the student government to bring these activists, which help to stir up the interest and the abilities of the people who are there.
Yeah, and it's very similar. But the other factors, and the fact that I thought, and I may be partial to it because I was out of San Francisco State, and I was out there. I thought the things that we were involved in. First of all, we basically took over the tutorial program. Now, the tutorial program, because once we decided that we were going to be a community, not only be a campus organization, but a community-based organization, the next thing we talked about, what student institutions existed within the community that we can become engaged in. We essentially took over the tutorial program. The tutorial program at San Francisco State, because it was a teacher's program, provided one, work-study jobs, two, it had 15 or more centers around the city in all the neighborhoods, Latin neighborhood, Asian neighborhood, African American neighborhoods. Had about 15 centers, and this kind of loose arrangement allowed us to kind of be in the community. So we not were only in the community as participants working with the students, the children of people who were engaged in community activism. We were there at those meetings as well. So once the tutorial program gave us an inroad into the Western Addition Community Organization, or organizations out in the Bayview Hunters Point, or organizations within the Latin community. So that was a major kind of thrust for us. Plus, you have to factor in the impact that the Black Panther Party had on us. Because the Black Panther Party helped radicalize have radicalized the Black Student Union, because you did have those elements of struggle. You had one student who said, "I'm going to be a frat boy, and that's all. Let me pay bid whist," and so on and so on. Then you had students, on the other hand, who were basically what I would say cultural nationalists, and then you had students who were more on the progressive, who had moved and studied and read everything from Marxism-Leninism to everything else. So you had all these elements that were there, and the question there was an intense dialogue. So between all those elements, particularly between the latter two, the cultural nationalists and more progressive elements.
Now, how did this get you into acting?
How did I get? We get it. I thought we were going to talk about. I thought we were going to talk about politics.
I want to hear this.
But I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, they're related. That's the whole point.
They're all related, because we were doing when Baraka came out there, we were doing agitprop plays. Ben Caldwell's First Militant Preacher. Ben Caldwell's The Job. Ed Bullen's How Do You Do? Amiri Baraka's Mad Heart, Jimmy Garrett's We Own the Night, et cetera, et cetera. So we did that, and that's what I just happened to be. I felt that doing this, I could be of some use. Baraka came into the BSU office one day and said, "I want some of you so-called revolutionary brothers to come be in these plays." I was 20 years old. I had never been on stage in my life. Never been over. My mother used to admonish us, because she said, why is it all my kids all they do is holding palms and don't have a line, don't have nothing to say. And we saying, well, I'm sure glad that's all I had to do is hold one of those palms in the Easter pageant at church, But that's how I did. It was the first experience, and something happened. There was this revelation that happened. There's something dynamic happened, and I worked at it, and I saw that the harder that I worked at it, the more illuminating it became, and the more interested it became. It didn't lead me to the idea I was going to make a career out of it, but certainly it made me the minister of culture for the BSU. So that's how I got. That's how I got involved in it. It was my first WITCOM, and then when I was working, I worked in community development for 6 years. And about midway through that, I decided that I just wanted to do acting as some way of of getting some sort of relaxation. It's recreational. Then it turned into something else. And then when I first came in contact with Fugard's work, it was about 1975. Then I said, "Oh, I got a map. I got a you know, I like the beauty of his language. And yet, because there's only two of you or three of you on stage in Fugard's work, it's just customary. There's something else that happens, you know, because it really provides you an avenue to learn to learn the craft itself.
I went to the play and we talked afterwards, the dialogue, and I asked you if it was something that you would ad-lib in some instance. You said every single piece of it was something that was literal from the play.
It comes from there. Every word. Every single word.
That's a tremendous task to do that.
Well, I think it is. You commit. I don't know if it is. You commit yourself to the language and commit yourself to every word. You have to commit yourself to every word, and it's not always. I mean, it's word perfect. Sometimes that play. Sometimes we do that play, and it's word perfect. It is exactly the way it's written on the page. The three of exactly the way it's written on the page. And sometimes we throw an "and" in here, a "the" in here, or sometimes we'll juxtapose one thing or whatever. But an audience really can't tell, because we do it all with conviction. But it's word perfect.
It's really different in film, where you have a chance to redo it and redo it and redo it until you get it right.
Well, yeah. I mean, and then in film you don't have the kind of rehearsal time.
Yeah.
I don't think film provides you with. Well, a lot of the work that you do in film, I mean, you do the same. What has been invaluable for me in doing film is that I do the same kind of research process. I mean, I don't go to the film and start shooting and working on the character on the first day of shooting.
You know, Danny, I'd love to keep talking, but those 30 minutes in African American Legends, particularly when you're talking with a legend, goes mighty, mighty fast.
Man.
I want to thank you for being with us on African American Legends and giving us a political education about how you West Coast people help to keep our East Coast people on target. Thanks again, Danny. Okay, buddy.
All right, dude.